Welcome back, dear friends. And in the discussion, in the panel discussion of today, we have two great colleagues from Serbia, Nikola Mirkovic in one side and Nikola Jovic in the other side. This will be a um, powerful conference, powerful speeches on a very important European issue. The main issue, the main case in the discussion of today is the recent event in Ankara, in the capital of Turkey. I mean, the summit of NATO. So, in the first question, I want to ask you, first of all, Nikola Jovic, please. The floor is yours on the case that which is your perspective after the NATO summit, the yearly NATO summit in Ankara, and what we can expect in Europe on our countries, on the security, defense, and the configuration of states.
Mhm. Yes, thank you. So while I was waiting for the conference to start, I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw one friend shared a picture. I thought it was a meme, but it wasn't a meme. It was out from one of the Western media outlets. Picture and a headline. It said, "Turkey, a new European defense pillar," and I thought it was a joke, given the history and everything that happened in the last centuries. But it wasn't a joke. So that could be like kind of a summarize of the recently finished NATO conference, because Turkey is without a doubt the second most powerful force in NATO after the US. And if we can put the whole conference and everything that happened into a few words, that would be that basically nothing dramatically changed. Old and the new problems were basically the same ones that are emerging in the past few years. So basically, Trump, meaning the forces that are behind Trump, that are pushing Trump and his agenda, are demanding, of course, the 5% for the defense of the countries, that every NATO country pays their own share, and wants to withdraw the American uh, military as much as possible from the collective defense, and to encourage them, of course, to take matter into their own hands and pay for their own defenses. And of course, the unwillingness of some, basically most of the NATO member countries, to pay as much as it's needed. Of course, there's the repetition of the biggest threat to NATO today, that is Russia, and the unwillingness of NATO to be more cooperative with the US and Israel-led coalition regarding the war in Iran. They put some emphasis on the matter of drones and other weapon technology that needs to be developed, and other stuff like that. So basically, to sum it up, what we can expect in the upcoming years is, I would say, even a bigger disintegration in NATO, because the emerging problems are not going to go away, and we see by some other processes that the US will be more and more withdrawing from this agreement. One of the biggest indicators is Germany's remilitarization. When you look at their plans for 2027, 2030, 2035, 2040, they are basically expanding an army, and their proposed goal is to have, as they say, the biggest and strongest European army in the following years. That, of course, is impossible if the US army is still all present in Europe, but that by default implies that the US will withdraw from Europe as much as they can. They might leave some a symbolic number of troops and some advisors, but it is evident that they will put the question of collective European security into Germany's hands, so they can be there as we can say, handlers of the security situation and issues. Turkey may be, as I said before, one of those pillars as well, but that kind of now is put into perspective regarding some plans that Israel has, as some of their security advisors recently said, that basically, to translate it into into basic terms, after Iran, Turkey is next regarding the threat that they seem to possess for Israel's interests in the region.
So,
So,
Nicola, it's so interesting that we saw summit in Ankara, in the capital of Turkey, and at the same time, the other major ally of USA, that is State of Israel, is threatening one of the most important allies in NATO, like or especially you were talking on Germany and the rearmament of Germany, and it's like, okay, First World War, Second World War, it's a funny idea, it's a proper idea to give Germans a biggest army in Europe, in continental Europe. And also, Nikola Mirkovic, if you want, you can also join to the reply, because of course, in the First World War, Germany also played a special role in the starting of First World War between Austro-Hungarian Empire against the Serbian Kingdom. Oh, wait,
Sorry,
the microphone.
okay, sorry about
Yes.
that. I totally agree with what Nikola just said about the this NATO organization, that there's a nihil novi sub sole, nothing new under the sun in the way NATO is being run today. The way I really see it is that more than ever, NATO is the US's foreign legion, that they are trying, despite what is being said in European capitals, that they want a European army, that they're going to build their own army, that they're not solidaire with Donald Trump. I think that's a lot of that's clearly not the truth. If you look at the NATO statements, they're talking about a stronger NATO with a stronger European participation. And again, this is the new NATO 3.0, which is the US getting the Europeans to pay for not their own defense. They're getting the Europeans to pay for the Americans' offense against Russia, against other countries in the world. And this is what it's all about. Because if Europe was really going to have its own defense, then it would get out of NATO. And it's not getting out of NATO at all. On the contrary, when Donald Trump, in the latest discussions between the US and Brussels, the commercial discussions, the EU has totally submitted to NATO, to the US. I mean, when Donald Trump comes to the European countries and says that the European NATO countries have to build up 5% of their military budgets within NATO, they say yes, they don't say no. When Donald Trump tells the Europeans that they have to buy for over 750 billion euros in American hydrocarbons, they say yes. They don't say no when he tells them that they've got to buy for over 40 billion euros in American artificial intelligence. They say yes. So Donald Trump and the EU have got, I would say, a special relationship, one of a complicated one. But at the end of the day, it's the same game. Washington is pulling the strings, and the Europeans are just hoping that Donald Trump will be replaced by somebody else who's more of a globalist than Donald Trump is, because I think everybody agrees to say that it's difficult to discuss with Donald Trump. But the end game here is making sure that Europe is going to take its share of the burden, of the military burden, to keep on attacking Russia, which was initiated by the US. This is America's war against Russia, and it's happening on Ukrainian soil. So that's not new. I think what is interesting, and that what also Nikola pointed out to, is that there are these differences between NATO countries. There's a lot of sugarcoating in Ankara, showing that NATO is one big organization, that they agree on everything, that they're going forward, and it's one big happy family. But these past weeks, we've had the Netherlands, we've had Bulgaria, we even had Poland saying that they didn't want to continue to support Ukraine as they've been doing for these past years. We've got tensions between Turkey and Israel, which are two of the US's biggest partners. And this is a huge paradox, even for the EU countries. I find it quite amazing that none of the European pundits or media spoke about this, is that Emmanuel Macron got after the conference, said that these were the Asians, the Canadians, the Americans, the Europeans getting together, upholding the rule of law, international order, and sovereignty. And he was saying this in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, which is actually occupying the north of Cyprus, which is an EU member. And nobody mentioned this. Nobody said, what are we going to do for the people from Cyprus? This is like a non-issue. We don't want to talk about this. So again, there's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of lies and deceit. And we know that this is the Atlanticist method. I mean, this is nothing new for people who know exactly how the show is being run. And I think that the pivotal point is the fact that the US is getting the EU to commit more to defense, to the military, to the engagement in this offense. And if I could just end with one last maybe comment, is that about 10, 15 years ago, EU member countries would buy more than 60% of their military material. They would buy this directly from European companies, the European military industrial complex. A lot of French companies, German companies, British companies. Now, today, we've got over 60% of the procurement of European NATO countries, which is directly in the US. So the US is getting the EU to increase its military budget to buy more from the US military industrial complex. So this has nothing to do with a European military or from some sort of the differences or different path from Brussels that Brussels would take, getting it further away from Washington. On the contrary, this is more integration and submission of the European Union to Washington.
Nikola, you mentioned the case of Cyprus, this European Union member. It's divided in three parts, as just like in the famous De Bellum Gallico, Gallia es omnis divisa in partes tres, Cyprus es omnis divisa in partes tres. One is the northern Turkish Republic, the other is the Republic of Cyprus, and the third side are British
Correct.
military bases.
Yes. Yeah, that's totally correct.
It's interesting because the war that created these three parts of Cyprus, it erupted in a month of July, but in the 1974. And nobody cares on it. And it's also interesting that in the NATO case, there are struggle from Turkey against Greece, against Greek island, because Turkey has the project of the blue homeland, the Mavi Vatan in Turkish, and they want literally to expel Greeks from some of the islands in the eastern Aegean Sea, and it seems nobody cares. But I would like to raise a new question. Nikola Jovic, and you will have the floor, because it's very interesting. Nikola Mirkovic knows it better because from France, and me, in my case, from Spain. But NATO leaders are talking about we have to ensure our European security against Russia, but who is ensuring our security inside of European countries? Because we have mafias, organized crime gangs, we have some kind of terrorism, we have a lot of inner problems in European countries. And it's like, no, the only problem is Russia, and we have to ensure the security of European peoples abroad, outside, in the eastern border. And sometimes they say Eastern Front. But what's your opinion on this case, Nikola Jovic?
Yeah, well, basically that's like a diversion, forget about your internal issues, forget about, mass immigration, economic crisis, social crisis, forget about the agenda you're being shoved at, down your throat, forget about diversity, inclusion, everything. That's just, the crazy right-wing conspiracy theories. Our real enemy is Russia, So basically, I would like to add up on Nikola's former point. Basically, what we're seeing now is a kind of a transformation of the general agreement which NATO once was. So basically, the first type of their agreement, I would say, is a coalition led by the US against Russia, of course, the former Soviet Union. But now we're seeing a transformation in the way it's been done. Now, the US wants to withdraw, as I said, as much as they can, and basically to put European countries in charge of fighting the Russians for them. So they get all the benefits, the European countries get all the losses. And the same goes for Pacific region, of course, where I believe in the upcoming years they will remilitarize Japan and the neighboring countries to create kind of a wider coalition against China, so they can, for the interest of the United States, tackle China and create like a sanitary corridor, as they call it, after the World War I for the Soviet Union. The same goes now. So basically, and of course, that will all be enforced by the weapons they will buy from US companies. So I think America is kind of trying to recreate the strategy from the Second World War, because, they had the great economic crisis, depression, and everything else. And then all of a sudden, once they entered World War II, and even before, selling weapons to everybody, regardless of who we're speaking about, even Hitler, or the Allies, whatever. And through that economic, I would say, prosperity, which was driven basically by their military-industrial complex, America finishes the World War II as the only country that's not in recession, that's not in debt, that's actually economically stronger. So I kind of see a similarity in this situation. So basically, they force European countries and East Asian countries, I mean all of their allies, to buy their weapons so they can fix their economic situation at home and fight their battles for them, while they are, I would say, more occupied by handling things back home, trying to sort out situation at home and doing your and having your allies fight your battles for you. That can be, kind of historically, I would say, compared to the strategy of Rome and even the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman Empire, where you have the barbarians, so-called, fighting other barbarians on your behalf and as your mercenaries. And in the meantime, you are dedicated to your domestic affairs, fixing the economic situation, the social crisis, the everything else. So basically, it's a win-win situation for America and lose-lose situation for European countries at first, since Russia is, of course, still enemy number one. So basically, what will European countries get? They will get, they will have to go in debt to raise up the armies, and then they will have to use those armies to fight Russia, and of course bleed out their peoples, their economies, and everything else. And the social problems you mentioned are going to be shoved away, under the rug, and going to be continue to be ignored until the moment it basically implodes. We're seeing, a wave of new migrant violence in Ireland. In France, it's basically common. It's not even a headline in the news anymore. I think even in perspective, they will try to fill up the ranks of those new European armies, maybe even with those migrants. Because they will put a finger on their forehead and they will say, we have tens of thousands of young, strong, military capable men that are basically very violent. Why not use them as manpower for the Eastern Front? Because it is obvious that domestic population, whether we're talking about Spain, Italy, France, Germany, whatever, are not going to willingly go to fight Russia because of historic experience, because of the things they're seeing in the last 4 years with the devastating bloodbath in Ukraine. So I think that's like also kind of win-win situation, how to handle that internal crisis by trying to force the migrants basically to be their mercenaries on the Eastern Front. But then again, that puts into perspective one more problem. Germany, for instance, is, you can read it behind the lines, is very cautious with giving weapons and, military integrating those foreign elements, the migrants and stuff like that, because they see it basically as a shortcut to civil war. Because if the migrants that are very homogeneous as communities, you have Turkish minority, you have Moroccan minority, you have other minorities, but they are very compound as a group within the German society. And of course, Germans are dispatched in thousands of groups and divisions and everything else. So basically, is that like a pathway to and a shortcut to civil war? But then again, when you understand the principal rule of the forces behind these major global events, the bankers, the owners of these world corporations and stuff like that, their basic rule is order out of chaos. So my question fundamentally is, are we gonna have to experience another chaos on the European soil, grand chaos like World War One and World War Two after that, so that out of that chaos a new order can emerge, and of course a more controlled order, more centralized order, more order that is basically run by these high level corporations and institutions that don't respond to governments, that don't respond to people, that are basically unelected and can do whatever they want. So I see it basically all of these processes that I talked about like a highway to establishing full control, due to the plans of Davos and World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab's, writings on the Great Reset and stuff like that. So, and of course, the ever-present danger of AI and technocratic feudalism, as Yanis Varoufakis calls it. So basically, I think the prologue to all of these problems is creating this big chaos that can emerge. On one side you have the war in Russia, on the other side you will have a disruption in every society and every country of the European Union. So when you combine all of those processes together, the common theme for all of them is establishing control out of the ruins of the former world that was once present there. So that's kind of the way I see it, and I would like to hear, of course, your perspective and Nikola's perspective on it.
Thanks a lot, and Nikola Mirkovic, please, the floor is yours, and the microphone activated.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. I think definitely we see that at the head of in Europe, the current elites have done nothing really to build an integrated Europe. I mean, I remember being a kid, we were told that Europe would be a powerhouse, able to compete against China, able to compete against the US, able to have its own currency, able to have so many things which would make the lives of Europeans better. And we can imagine that the Europeans, after the shocks of both world wars, they wanted peace. They wanted to get the threat of wars away. But the Bible says you judge a tree by its fruit. And if you look at the fruits of the European Union today, it's a catastrophe. I mean, we just mentioned in the past 20 minutes the problems of the crime rates, which are increasing everywhere. The problem that the European Union countries aren't investing in research and development. The level of the studies, university studies in France and the UK and a lot of Western European countries is really very, very low. We've got problems in France today. People who who are not esteemed to be correctly speaking French. That means they don't know coming out of school, out of basic school, they can't read, write, and can do basic calculations. So this is what the European Union is brought. And I'm not even talking about massive immigration. I'm not even talking about the destructuration of the society is, the tax against families, the tax of everything which made these different nations strong in the past and which made European nations some of the biggest nations or more prominent nations on the globe for centuries. Everything has been taxed slowly, which means that today the European Union has failed all of its promises. And that's a fact. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a thought, a hypothesis. It's a fact. Look at the figures today. What is coming out of Europe in terms of technology? Some things are coming out, but most of the more sophisticated technology is coming clearly out of China. The US is still is lagging a bit behind China today, but so many things are coming out of Asia. Where are the European telephones? Where are the European sophisticated satellites? We're all using Microsoft. We're all using Apple. We're all using all these American or Chinese technologies. And I'm talking just about retail, everyday use. I'm not even talking about the sophisticated machinery that we can be finding in some of the developments of our economy. They're not here. There is no European. It's disappearing in front of our eyes. And the problem is that a lot of people don't see it because we still have, coming back to the Roman empires and the panem et circenses, the bread and games. we're not seeing this happening in front of us because we've got reels everywhere. We've got the football games, the soccer games now. We've got all this going on. We're occupied 24/7 by noises, by screens. We don't even know what walking alone in the nature is, and this is destroying the structure of our civilization. It's not just this is really something which is terrible. I think this is one of the, if not the biggest attack against our European Helleno-Christian civilization that we can imagine. So this, of course, is very, very bad for Europe as a whole, whether you're within the European Union or without. This is very bleak, and especially when you see that the elites at the top of these nations, the only thing that they have to offer today is war against Russia. They want to build Europe around a boogeyman, against a scapegoat. They want to say that we're going to be stronger if we're all against Russia, but that's not the case. We won't be stronger. We will die. We will die in such a war. This will be a catastrophe for all of Europe, just as the First World War was, just as the Second World was. A Third World War would be the same thing. And let's not forget that today we've got several nations which have nuclear weapons. So what would be left of Europe after this? And the US, a couple thousands of kilometers away, are they really going to intervene? Or will they do like the First World War and Second World War? They'll just let us fight against each other until everybody's almost dead. And then they'll come over, they'll bomb everybody, and then they'll lend us money to rebuild us again. I mean, we've already seen this scenario practically twice, at least in the Second World War. This was obvious. And so we're going through that same path this way. The only thing that, the caveat here is that because of the nuclear, I would say, threat, we don't know. Mark Twain. It was attributed to Mark Twain this saying, which is quite funny. I don't know. I didn't find the real source, but people say Mark Twain said it. But he says, "I don't know what the Third World War will look like, but at the Fourth World War, we will be fighting with sticks and stones. So there will be nothing left. There will be no European powerhouse because we will be totally annihilated." And of course, the continents, the civilizations, the countries which will have either avoided the war, or which will have participated in maybe one, or which will have been smarter than us, they will take advantage of the situation. So we are at the brink of the extinction of our civilization if we don't react quite quickly. And this is actually a very dire situation that one should not take lightly because of the consequences that we're taking. If I get back to France, we speak a lot about the war against Russia today, and what our current government is trying to implement is euthanasia. That means the fact that they are going to people who want to die will just ask to be killed in the French medical system. If they're not, and where are the limits? They're suffering. They don't feel well. They don't feel good. And this is what our current civilization is offering the French, for example, today. This is, you can either die in Russia or you can die just because you don't feel well, or this is what they're offering. There's no perspective of, I would say, stimulating more children, more youth, about investing in research and development, in making our streets safe, and promoting our culture. None of that, which our ancestors have done practically since the beginning of time. Everything is contrary, and there's something quite dark in all of this, which is quite scary, and which just is shattering this whole European dream. If it ever was possible one day or another, it is sure today that it is not a dream, and it is clearly a nightmare for many Europeans, and it can become even a bigger nightmare if we continue down this path.
Nikola Mirkovic, you said about US products and services from USA, from China, nothing produced in Europe. And it's very interesting because Europe is purchasing the services, most of the internet services, applications from USA, and the products from China. It's we can say hardware from China and the services software from United States. And here what we have: chat control, the digital euro, control the society, the economy, the thought, the mindset of the people. But it doesn't matter. we have one final question because NATO has the solution for these problems. Yes, it's very funny. They said in the documents on the summit, the call to action encourages financial institutions to increase lending and equity investments in the defense, security, and resilience sectors, while allies are expected to strengthen domestic financing mechanisms and support public-private co-investment models. That is the NATO bank. For what? For purchasing weapons. Whom? USA. Okay, wonderful. This is very interesting business on it. And please, Nikola Jovic, the floor is yours on this issue because one final one final thing. Europe was known in the whole world as the welfare states, the countries of welfare state, the social protection. But now we saw both in Spain, in France, in Germany, that no more welfare state. We are in some kind of state of war against Russia. Russia is imminent threat. They are going to destroy us. But you go out to the street in Madrid, in Paris, in Berlin, and you say, you see, you taste an absolute different reality. It's not Russia who is creating problems inside of our countries, but the solution that they are giving to us, giving to Europeans, is NATO bank. And please, we need this public-private investment for weapons. Let's go,
Yes.
please.
Yeah, so basically, I recall an episode like a month ago when the German Chancellor Merz, he was speaking to audience, and he said basically, yeah, we're gonna have to cut off your pensions. You know, we have to lower them because we need to save money. And when you realize they're cutting off on social welfare and expanding on military, you get the idea where the money, where that extra money is going. You know, taking like kind of a reverse Robin Hood, taking away from the poor and giving to the rich. But yeah, that's basically the paradigm of their agenda. So you have to ask yourselves, who are these people really serving, and who do they owe their allegiance? Who in whose interest are they actually working? You know, because if you look at Germany as a symbol of European decay, Germany is one of the countries that imposed heavy sanctions on Russia entirely on their entirely on their they have been basically economically collapsing because of that. So they took all the damage from it, and they didn't basically even shook Russia for a moment, because Russia found new markets easier than Germany did for their importation of energy, and many other things that seem basically suicidal from the point of view of their national interest. And it's the same with every other country, but Germany is a paradigm because, as the saying goes, when you have a strong Germany, we have a strong Europe, and you have weak Germany, we have weak Europe. And if the Germany, that is the so-called economic engine of the EU, is collapsing, and its auto industry is firing its employees and shutting down factories, and of course going back to military production, because the Volkswagen and the others they started as a military industrial complex producing tanks, armored vehicles, and other things, and then after World War II they shifted to civilian production. So basically we're now getting a full circle. They are going back to their roots, producing weapons. So basically, to sum it up, the dilemma that the European societies and countries face today is: are they going to continue on this war path that can bring nothing but devastation and destruction for all of them? Or will they manage to find a way to organize themselves and to pressure through, political parties, through NGOs, through media, through all the other alternatives to pressure their current governments enough to evade from being basically dragged into this war against Russia. And if they manage to do so, they will save not only themselves, but I would say even the whole world to a certain degree. And it's not impossible. When you look at, for example, the two wars against Iraq, the first one in 1991, the Desert Storm, you had like over 40 countries involved, and everybody was like cheering basically to be a part of that. They were sending troops, they were sending weapons and everything else. When you see the second war against the Iraqi, only 12 years later, basically the support was cut in half. So basically we had like more or less 10 countries involved. So it shrunk down to 30% of the first coalition. And every other war was less and less supportive and vocal, I would say. So I think that if they manage to get their country out of that coalition, they will be safe, basically. Because it's obvious the US won't lead that coalition. It will cheer from the background and say, you guys can do it, as they're doing for Ukraine at the moment. Of course, they will send weapons and everything else. But it's obvious that in perspective, Germany needs to be the one that's leading that coalition. So in perspective, if the Germans cannot go away from the war path, because of the strength of the system that controls the Germany at the moment. At least what the other European countries can do is try as hard as they can to stay away from that coalition and not be a part of it, because that, in perspective, can then that can persuade them not to engage at all, because that would be like clearly suicidal, and it can't be only suicidal. It has to have at least like a small chance or perspective of winning, like even as an illusion, I would say. So basically, that depends on that question. Depends the future of European countries, because as I said, it's not only war with Russia. It's like when you are with war, you completely have like a suspension of all the civil rights, the liberties, the everything. You have war economy, you have war laws. You have suspension of everyday life. That gives the government carte blanche to impose COVID-like control over the society, and it's like in Orwell's novel 1984. You will get a state of permanent war where everything that's done to a society will be justified by the lasting war. They will say, but we have to do this because we're at war with Russia, and stuff like that. So basically, they're all interconnected processes, but the war with Russia is like the central point. So if there is strength enough in each and every European country to pressure their elected leaders to not be a part of this grand coalition, I think we can avoid the worst case scenario, or even let's say to minimize it to any degree possible. Because as we've seen from World War I and World War II, Europe has, in total, come out weaker than it was. With a few dozen million people less, the devastated economies, devastated countries, devastated societies, and most importantly, has come out as geopolitical object of great powers that were using it for their interests. And as Nikola said, basically Europe is now kind of a colony of the US, but it's also like a market for the Chinese products, and they're basically living off credit, and going in debts, not producing anything, like living like some kind of an aristocrat that's selling his house and painting and castles to live a joyful life, and then when he bankrupts, then the only option that he's left with is suicide, that is euthanasia. So basically, I think Europe is living off that credit, and it's spending it enormously and getting in bigger debts. So that I don't want to take up any more time. That's like the conclusion. If they can manage to stay away from that war coalition that's assembling as we speak, and it will be in progress in the upcoming years, I think they have a chance. We have a chance basically to survive, because all three of us are living in Europe, and even I in Serbia, which is not a NATO member country, will in some way be directly or indirectly damaged by these processes. Even if we are not at war directly, we will still be like as they say, the south wing of NATO, and stuff like that. So basically, nobody is spared, and even people that are living thousands of miles away from Europe will see the consequences of this war and feel it on their skin, like we've felt the consequences of war in Ukraine and Iran. The world is so connected, it's so interconnected, it's so globalized that basically no big event wherever in the world it happens is only local and only a matter of that country that it happened in. So yeah, that's basically like the summarization. Either Europe will manage to avoid war with Russia, or they will all die in the process of being once again sent to the Eastern Front.
Thanks a lot, Nikola, for your long explanation. And now, final part, the conclusion, the ending for Nikola Mirkovic. And I would like to thanks to you for your participation. I would like to see you more and more in these programs of Association Sovereingty. And Nikola Mirkovic, please, the final floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks also for the invitation. It was quite enjoyable to discuss about this, because these are, I think, fundamental issues. And we do see also when we talk about Europe and we talk about the principles that the European Union is supposed to uphold, like freedom of speech, like democracy. Again, we were talking about the Europe being dwarfed from a technological point of view. It is totally being dwarfed from, I would say, a human rights point of view, because these debates, which are fundamental, which should be discussed on mainstream media every day, because we're talking about the destiny of our civilization, we're talking about the future of our children, we're talking about all these issues, but these topics and the way we're talking about it today are just blacklisted from most of the medias. And even if they're gaining a lot of momentum on alternative media, I think it's fantastic that you're giving us the opportunity to discuss this today. We have seen during this discussion how, I would say, the double standards of the European Union, the lies and manipulation of NATO and of the Atlanticists. I think we've debunked this myth that Donald Trump is a sovereignist, that he is for America first, an isolationist. He is an imperialist, as a lot of his predecessors were. He may be probably different than an Obama or a Jimmy Carter, but he is working for the American military-industrial complex and all the lobbies of this deep state, or the blob, or whatever you want to call it today, of these entrenched Atlanticists, imperialists, which are within the American administration, working with the revolving door, I would say, process with major corporations, feeding these corporations, feeding the finance industry, and not bringing, first of all, to the Americans what they voted for. I mean, this is, I think, one of the, one day the Americans will have to open their eyes, like most democracies, that we cannot continue on voting these people cannot continue on voting for candidates which do the contrary of what they promise. I mean, Donald Trump is doing 180 degrees on what he promised. He promised no wars. He's going for wars. He promised that he would make make America great again, and the only way they're doing this is feeding off, like mafia were doing, of their satellite countries. Let's not forget that when Donald Trump was first elected in 2025, he went to the Mideast, he went to Japan, he went to Korea, he went to the European Union, and every time he got back to Washington saying, these countries have pledged that they're going to invest billions and billions of dollars in our economy. So this is not investing, this is not transforming the American economy to build jobs for the Americans using their own intelligence, their own resources. This is plundering foreign countries, the vassals of the empire, to make America great again. And nobody's resisting that within the American Atlanticist world. And those who are resisting it, well, we see what's happening. That's why there's a war against Iran. That's why there was a war against Russia. That's why the president of Venezuela has been kidnapped. So I think All of this is blatant, it's blunt. We can see it, we can analyze it. We have, the only thing is that we don't have access to these mainstream media today, but it's getting better. The situation, I think, more and more people are opening their eyes to this. And as Nicola just really pointed out, and that's something fundamental that we all understand this, is that the trajectory, the direction we are taking is death. I mean, it's death of our civilization, it's death of our children, it's war, it's euthanasia, it's the abandonment of our traditional societies, or the way we see things, and the way we've built ourselves. Let's not forget, I mean, I always talk about this when I talk about sovereignty in France. I mean, France has been one of the biggest, I would say maybe not biggest, but an important actor on the world map for centuries as a sovereign state, with its dark hours and its great hours both together, but like any nation. But it has been there as a sovereign state. And now that it has been in this European construction, it has lost all the prerogatives of a sovereign state, and it doesn't have the power today to work on how to make the life of its own people better. And I'd like to conclude on this: how can it make the life of the French people better if it's not enabling the French people? And this applies to any Western country, if it's or any country what's at all, for the matter, for the same. I mean, it applies. Sorry, to any other countries. How can you develop democracy? How can you fight for democracy if you don't live in a democracy? How can you fight for freedom of speech if you don't have freedom of speech? And I think we have to encourage the people in their own countries, of course, to know what's going on from a geopolitical point of view, but also to focus on what are the pillars of the countries in which we live in. How can we let people bring us to war, and they haven't even asked us our opinion? Which European country has been to a referendum or has been asked by its political representatives, whether they be for the left or the right, if they want war? Who's been asked for this? Who said that? Which European nation has been asked if they want to spend more on feeding the American industrial complex, or creating hospital beds, or investing in our universities, in our schools, in our security? We haven't been asked any of this. And those who want to raise these issues are being called all sorts of names by people who just are refusing the debate. So I think this is showing how today Europe is clearly, Nicholas, I think the first said that Turkey was the sick man of Europe in the 19th century, but we could say that today Europe is the sick man of the world. And I think this has to be a call for European nations to wake up really quickly, because we can change the tide, as Nicholas said. We can change this tide. We shouldn't be fatalists and say, okay, this is a done deal, we can't do anything. No, we can do things. We have strong nations. We've got old nations with really deep roots. And if we just bring a little bit more sunshine, water to these roots, we can resist this momentum. And I think that the system has shown that it's particularly weak. A system which lies, which cheats, a system which talks about war, is a system which is actually feeble, which is not strong. And so we've got to take advantage of this situation to make sure to turn the tide, to turn the tables around, and to make sure that we are able to defend the principles in which we believe in. And that's of course diplomacy, negotiation, safety, a lot of common sense behind that. But if we don't do anything, we will go into this very down this dark path, and with a very bleak outcome for everybody.
I totally agree on you too. But this is the moment, the time to an end for this program. I hope you enjoy your time in this program. I hope that also, and we expect the comments from audience in the panel down. Let's see us in the next program. Stay tuned, because sovereignty is a process, is a necessity of our countries for our future, especially for the European future. Thanks, Nikola Jovic. Thanks, Nikola Mirkovic, for your time with us. And let's see us on the next program.